So we are starting the last MEA side event at this pavilion at this UNEP 7. So we need to ensure that we finish it on the positive and high note. So please let's clap for yourselves and for the team behind this pavilion, and also with many thanks to the technical team over there. So thanks everyone for coming. My name is Mariana Osipova, and I work as a youth education specialist at the UN Environment Program here in Nairobi, Kenya, and I will be your moderator for today. To be very honest, that's my first moderator's event of this scale. Yes, and I think I feel very comfortable with this panel, for it to be a first time. So thank you very much. So we heard a lot about MEA synergies in the past few days, including today. But today we really want to know how youth action can advance MEA's implementation, depending on different contexts and different dimensions. And we have an amazing panel today, and I will invite everyone to join me at the podium right now. And I will start with His Excellency, Mr. Hambartsum Mativasyan, Minister of Environment of Armenia. Please join me here. Followed by Ms. Yvonne Igero, Secretary General of the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wildlife, Fauna, and Flora, aka CITES. Thank you. Next we have Peter Bulimo, member of the Children and Youth Major Group to UNEP, aka CYMG to UNEP. Just sit next to Yvonne. Yes. Next one we have Mr. Kamal Udawulala, representing Ministry of Environment of Sri Lanka, the Secretary of the Ministry of Environment of Sri Lanka. Dear Ms. Astrid Schomacker, Executive Secretary of the Convention on Biological Diversity, CBD, please join us here. And we have Kevin Lunzalo, who is the co-founder of the Kenyan Youth Biodiversity Framework. So please join us here as well. Thank you, everyone. And now I would love to invite Susan Gardner, who is the Director of the Ecosystems Division at the UN Environment Program, who will do the opening remarks for us. Susan, feel free, very welcome.
Well, thank you so much, and excellencies, colleagues, so many friends here today. I'd like to start by referencing the UN Secretary General's vision for the future, because in our common agenda, he actually called out for meaningful youth engagement in decision-making at all levels. He said from local to global, including in UN processes, and just earlier this year, he actually specifically said, when he was directing remarks to a group of young people, he specifically said, your voice, your ideas, and your leadership matter. So I want to start by thanking all of you, young people, for ensuring that you are raising your voices, you're bringing your voices to these issues. We know that 70% of young people are very or extremely worried about climate change, and that's actually more than any other age group. And we know that we can see that worry in the streets, in community groups. We can see it in classrooms. Young people are often the first ones to raise the alarm and the first to organize around solutions, around action, to insist, let's get moving, let's do something about this. So we also know that the global youth population is projected to reach almost 1.3 billion people by 2030. And so this momentum should only just keep growing. Across MEAs, as we're going to hear today, there is now finally growing recognition that youth participation is necessary to meeting goals, and we're doing things about it. I mean, of course, this is only logical, right? Everything we do in UNEP everything we do in the multilateral environmental agreements, everything it stands for, it's meant to safeguard the future. It's meant to safeguard your future as young people. Yet, the people who are going to have to live the longest with these decisions are too often outside on the margins of these decisions. And so I'm very much looking forward to hearing from CITES and CBD and others who are really taking the lead and testing new structures that bring young people more closely into the decision-making processes. And we're very pleased with UNEP's own UNEP Youth Working Group that now includes CITES in the Montreal Protocol. And this cooperation should just continue to grow, but we know sometimes the reality is different. We've all been in situations where a young person is asked to join a panel, or moderate a panel at the last minute. This happens, because it feels like it's not really because the young person had a chance in directing the agenda or the program, but instead, was needed to be there to give an impression, to show youth engagement. And we know that it's important to make sure that that engagement is authentic. We don't want tokenism. We don't want limited access to actual negotiating rooms and to the rules and to knowing what's happened. And we certainly don't want to see funding being limited and never reaching the youth-led initiatives, because those are barriers that limit young people, and they slow down the progress that we all can make together as part of the MEAs. And the most durable solutions we know emerge when we include youth-driven innovation and traditional knowledge and experiences, all of this coming together. And at UNEP, we're really trying to put this in practice, working with young people. And you'll hear a lot about a number of different programs today, but I think what I really am eager to do is hear from this incredible panel. We're welcoming the 2025 Global Youth Declaration on Environment as such an important step, and it matters even more when we realize that in the world young people are stepping into is so different than what my generation, Generation X, what we grew up with. I mean, just to give you an example, let me talk to some Generation X people for a minute. Do you realize that we moved in our lifetime from record players to listen to our music to cassette tapes? Do you remember this? Everybody remembers this. Anybody Gen X remembers this. And then we got to CDs, and that was amazing. And then, Gen X knows, anybody born in the 60s and 70s remembers this. And then when we first had iPods, the iPods, let me tell young people, iPods were unbelievable because they could store 5 gigabytes of storage. And that felt extraordinary at the time. That's what we evolved with. And so we recognize, I think we all have to recognize that the changes that are coming in this century, young people are far better at adapting to all of this than we can. You guys are already programmed. You're already ready for the changes that are going to happen in the next century. You understand it. You know how to navigate that space. You're going to drive it. And that's why it is so important that we continue to push forward on ways that we can empower you to help shape those decisions now that will affect your future and that will empower you to even more clearly be able to be a part of that leadership in the future. Thank you.
Very much, Susan, for your kind words. So youth participation is critical, and you provided us with data and good examples. So now I would like to invite Yvonne Higuero to also do the opening remarks for us. And once again, thank you for hosting us and co-hosting.
Thank you so much, and it actually is really exciting to be here. I've been really involved in the youth movement under CITES, and I'm always impressed by the energy and motivation that all of you have to be involved in these processes, and we actually feel very inspired by you, so I'm really happy to be here. Susan, you tried to age us by talking about record players and cassettes, but the minister sitting next to me said that he does remember cassettes, and he was born a lot later than us. So that's very interesting to know too. That's not what you meant. When he told me the year that he was born, I thought that's what he meant. But yes, and I think that it's also about who feels young, and we feel younger when we're around you because you give us inspiration and with all your enthusiasm. So Excellencies, distinguished delegates, dear young leaders and friends, it is a pleasure to co-host today this joint UNEA-MEA side event on youth leadership for biodiversity. I'm really happy to be here in Kenya. I lived here many years ago for 8 years, and it is also home to many species covered by the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora, or CITES, which is a little bit easier for all of us. We have here Kenyan aloes to the Taita blade-horned chameleon in Kenya, which are all CITES listed. I would like to warmly thank all our co-organizers, the CBD Secretariat, UNEP, and the Children and Youth Major Group to UNEP, as well as all youth representatives and member states. I am also pleased to acknowledge the presence of His Excellency Hambarzum Mateyovosian, Minister of Environment of Armenia, and Mr. Kamal Rohita Uduwawala, Secretary, Ministry of Environment of Sri Lanka, and thank them for joining us today, because what's really important is how governments are supporting youth to be involved in these processes. Across the world, young people are driving change at a remarkable pace. Their leadership through research, advocacy, community action, and innovation is strengthening efforts to address the triple planetary crisis, which you've been hearing a lot about since we started this UNEA meeting. Really, the work that you're doing is to be able to address biodiversity loss, climate change, and pollution. Your engagement reminds us that effective and resilient environmental governance must be intergenerational. Youth participation is increasingly recognized across global frameworks, including the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, and within biodiversity-related MEAs, such as CITES, my own convention, the Convention on Biological Diversity, the Convention on Migratory Species, and the Wetlands Convention. You're being represented in all of these discussions and governance frameworks around the world. CITES parties have affirmed this through our resolution on youth engagement, which encourages collaboration with youth networks and fosters opportunities for learning, participation, and capacity building, which I find very important, so you will learn the ropes because you will be our future leaders. This aligns closely with the CITES Strategic Vision 2030, particularly its goals on improving governance, enhancing capacity for implementation, and contributing to the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. Today's discussion is an opportunity to deepen cooperation across all of these MEAs and to exchange concrete approaches for youth engagement, whether in wetlands conservation, sustainable and legal trade in wild species, or the protection of migratory species and the broader ecosystem health. Such collaboration helps parties deliver more coherent and impactful actions at national and regional levels, supporting the implementation of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework and advancing relevant UNEA resolutions that are being decided here this week. As MEA secretariats, we have a responsibility to enable and support this momentum. You can count on us that we are meeting that responsibility. The CITES Secretariat remains very committed to working with parties, donors, UNEP, and fellow convention to strengthen youth participation, expand capacity building opportunities, and ensure that young people's perspectives inform the implementation of biodiversity-related commitments. As CITES marks its 50th anniversary, we are reminded that the convention has endured because it has continuously evolved, adapting to new challenges, strengthening cooperation across MEAs, and welcoming new voices. Youth engagement is an essential part of this evolution. By bringing fresh perspectives, new ideas, and renewed energy, young people help ensure that CITES and the broader biodiversity community remain responsive, forward-looking, and effective for the decades ahead. Let me conclude by emphasizing that intergenerational collaboration is not only the right approach, but also essential for achieving our global goals for our people and for our planet. By supporting youth leadership and creating space for young people to meaningfully contribute across MEAs, we help ensure that our collective biodiversity efforts remain robust, inclusive, and future-focused. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Yvonne. It's really impressive that CITES has its own resolution on youth participation. I think this is the example we should all follow. And once again, thanks Susan and Yvonne for setting the tone for us. Now we will move to our moderated panel discussion. Please try to keep your answers between 5 and 7 minutes long. I know that's the last event in this pavilion, but there are many more outside, so maybe some of you also have further commitments. But it would be also great to just maximize on your experience, ideas, and solutions. So my first question will go to Peter and Kevin. So Peter, CYMG to UNEP has just recently presented the Global Youth Declaration on Environment, just last Sunday. And earlier this year, Global Youth Biodiversity Network developed the Collective Youth Vision for Biodiversity earlier this year, which was developed to support the youth-responsive implementation of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. So Peter, you will respond first. What do you see as 3 main priorities of the Global Youth Declaration on Environment? And with this in mind, building on this document, how can MEAs work together with youth to embed these recommendations across different conventions?
Thank you, Mariana. I think that's a bit of a loaded question, but we will try to tackle it. I personally joined MG, Children and Youth Major Group to UNEP at around 2022. And since then up to now, we only have had about 3 youth environmental assembly. And this could speak to the extent to which young people have tried to come into these decision-making spaces. Since UNEP was started back in the day, up to now, it is only 3 years that young people have had that opportunity to share their perspectives and really try to mainstream the opinions, the perspectives of young people into environmental multilateralism. And yet, within this short period, young people have been consistent in trying to ensure their voices are heard within the triple planetary crisis, particularly on biodiversity, taking cue from the previous youth declaration on the environment. We had critical issues and priority areas that we presented to the presidency of UNEA 6 at the time, including areas to do with biodiversity, ecosystem, and nature, where we were asking for rights-based, community-based, right-based, community-based, and traditional knowledge to be key and center in managing issues to do with biodiversity. We also had priorities around forests, where we are talking about deforestation and forest degradation, trying to ensure priorities to prevent rampant deforestation. We had resolutions around forests, food and agriculture, especially calling on to reduce harmful subsidies around intensive agriculture. Yet again this year, we have been critical about protecting nature and enhancing climate resilience. Particularly, we are asking resolutions and the UNEA 7 presidency to ensure that youth actions, especially at the grassroots, is reflective of what is happening at the national and multilateral level. Especially, we want more capacity development for young people to be able to integrate their inputs into NAPs, into NDCs, and also into the NBSAPs. We are also calling on intergenerational equity. You would understand this is the first time that really a standalone resolution on youth participation has made it to the discussion at UNEA, which is a big deal. We continue to see weak language and pushback on some of the text and language, but we think it's milestone, and it also speaks to the resilience that we put into this course. And again, we have asked to promote, to reform environmental governance to ensure efficiency, effectiveness, and ensure synergies across MEAs. You know, I happen to be a student of international forestry, and I'm glad that we are here with CITES and CBD and also UNEP. UNEP, CBD, and CITES are all members of the collaborative partnerships on forests. And within that collaborative partnerships, we continue to see some challenges in terms of fragmentation, overlapping roles, and I'm happy that CITES has a strategy on youth engagement, but I'm not sure about CBD and UNEP. If you can provide avenues for youth to plug in and help address some of the issues, especially, for example, in forestry, there is a big value chain around forestry that young people can plug into, but then the challenges of funding, lack of proper strategies that inform their engagement, and also the lack of intentionality in terms of intergenerational mentorship and collaboration has been quite a challenge. So I think with those priorities, if we can work together to address that, that would be a step in the right direction.
Thank you, Peter. It sounded like it were more than 3 main priorities, but that's still fine. So Kevin, I can repeat the question for you if you want. So my question to you, Kevin, is, again, what are the 3 main priorities that the GBF Youth Vision Paper has, in your opinion, and how we can ensure that MEAs can work together with youth to embed these recommendations across different conventions in implementation? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mariana, and thank you everyone for holding this space where we are discussing youth leadership in fostering the implementation of the various MEAs. Just going straight to your question, the Global Youth Declaration on the Environment and the vision statement produced by the Global Youth Biodiversity Network are 2 different documents, but they converge on 3 main priorities. One is the meaningful engagement of young people in the multilateral environmental agreement systems. And this is to mean that we are proposing that instead of the status quo currently, which is the tick box mechanism that has been utilized over the years, young people want to see structural fostered engagement within the negotiation frameworks. And it doesn't just end with having a youth constituency to a multilateral environmental agreement or a convention. It goes beyond that. It goes beyond saying that, oh, we have an advisory board or we have a youth constituency to a certain convention. But what are we doing as a convention to ensure that the voices of the young people, especially the vulnerable young people across the world and those who are coming from areas that are deeply impacted by the manifestations of the 1 crisis of the planet, the 4 manifestations, pollution, climate change, biodiversity loss, desertification, that they are having their voices strengthened and represented in the decisions. And there are avenues through which conventions can work closely with governments to foster such agreements, including the introduction of quota systems for young people to participate, introduction of monitoring indicators to see how many young people are probably part of the official government delegations, how many young people are taking part in the implementation projects that are happening on the ground, that are happening at the national level or local level or regional level, and also to measure the contribution of young people in all these targets that we have. For example, in my beloved CBD convention, and I'm not saying this because I'm sitting next to Madam Astrid, we have specific target on young people, on youth. And so we need to see how this target is being reflected in the national biodiversity strategies and action plans, the NBSAPs, and how governments are actually reporting back on these specific targets on effective engagement of youth. The second element is capacity building, and we talk about this a lot of times, that young people should not always be seen as the de facto recipient of capacity, we have enough capacity within the youth ecosystem that can be exploited to advance the ambitions of the conventions. And so we should have a shift from the age-based categorization of capacity to expert-based categorization of capacity, viewing young people as also, contributors of possible capacity to where these conventions need. And the last thing that I would love to mention is the issue of the implementation mechanisms. We talked about capacity before, but funding is always a challenge. And both the Global Youth Declaration on Environment and the GBF Vision Statement stress the need for youth-focused funding, the reduction of barriers to access to funding mechanisms so that young people can be enabled to effectively drive the implementation of the global environmental agenda. And so we need to focus on not necessarily like the liquid funding, but also technology transfer and other mechanisms related to resources that young people in different parts of the world could be lacking to advance this. And then the second bit of your question was, how can the MEAs work with young people to advance the implementation, if I can paraphrase. And I think, the basic start point will be that MEAs are synergized, that they are talking to each other in terms of ambition, in terms of resource pooling, and also in terms of what they mean for young people's engagement. And so it is really important that we see a synergy that cuts across, not just in terms of the thematic areas that they're working on, but that they are pulling all the resources together and they are meaningful in terms of their engagement with young people across the divide. Because the current situation where we have the biodiversity youth and the climate youth and the desertification youth and the mercury youth and is putting all these young people in siloed boxes, and it's difficult for them to engage because at the top level everybody is divided, so it's difficult for them at the grassroots and national level to work in coherence. But over time, young people have shown again and again that they are ready to be engaged. They have been knocking on the doors of these conventions. When the conventions were started, let's say the Rio Conventions in 1992, they were only serving governments. And over the years, young people have continuously reminded them that we need to have young people on the table. And so these conventions were forced to open doors over the years with the formulation of the youth constituencies. And now all the three Rio conventions have youth constituencies. But as I mentioned before, this is not enough. We need to go a step further. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kevin. I really liked what you said about age-based categorization of capacity. This is deep. So thank you very much. We will hear about how this is advanced on the national level from our esteemed guests a bit later. But now we will turn to Astrid, as also Peter was very curious how these processes are at the CBD level. So Astrid, my question to you is, what are you most proud of achieving in the past few years in terms of supporting youth in the Convention of Biological Diversity? So could you just give us a few examples and maybe share some impacts that were resulted from it? Thank you.
So thank you so much. And I think there's a reason why the youth event is the last event in this pavilion, because you always keep the best for last. So one thing that, and I start with a little bit of a self-criticism, of course, and I think you know that, and everybody here knows that when our conventions deliberate, parties speak, and then when parties have spoken, there's 1 minute left, and then the floor is given to stakeholders, and ever so often we end in tears. And I have like this personal commitment to myself. I don't want another COP, and I'm sure the minister agrees, where people start crying at the end because they have worked so hard, and especially youth has worked so hard. You have prepared as much as government delegations. You have well-rounded positions, and then you're not given the time at the end anymore to express your views, partially because others talk too much. So this is a very tough thing to say, but I think we all, and parties are the soul of the MEAs. They make the commitments, they need to be heard, their issues need to be brought to the general discussion, reflected on, etc. but you're the ones that are most affected. That was Susan's point very much in the beginning. You live with the decisions that MEAs make or do not make. So for me, one of the most important things, and I'm not so proud of what we've achieved so far, but I want to achieve more together with our Armenian hosts at COP17, is to give more space to youth in the formal discussions at the COPs. One of the things we've been discussing, for example, with our bureau members, is how can we organize our time differently? Can we have stricter time limits so that parties, yes, they can all speak, but maybe speak a bit shorter, so we have time set aside at the end for youth and others to speak. So that would be very important. What am I proud of? So within the CBD, we have a very, very active youth engagement, the Global Youth Biodiversity Network. It continues to grow. There has been an amazing conference in 2024 in Yokohama, where more than 100 youth came together, and more would have been there had we had funding. But I do need to thank Japan for having made that possible. And they spent 5 days discussing, strategizing, identifying priorities. There are 2 areas in which youth has been particularly engaged in the CBD. One, believe it or not, is awareness raising, because awareness raising is still possible. We sit here in the bubble, we believe that everybody understands why biodiversity matters and how it underpins well-being and societal progress in our economies, but in reality that is not the case. So youth has been very active, the Gibbon Network has been very active in explaining what is biodiversity, what is the Biodiversity Convention, and why it matters. And you've been doing inter alia a little brochure, or a little booklet, which is called CBD in a Nutshell, which, by the way, I read before I came to the Secretariat, so it's a really good publication. And we will now be able to update that, and that's really great for 2026, for the next COP, with the help of Japanese funding. So that is one thing, an important role in awareness raising. The second one, Gibbon has been sort of training its own members to reach out to governments to be integrated into the implementation process. So you all know we have a very ambitious framework, 23 targets, 2030, etc., much broader than what we've had before, but coming with an implementation framework that is really very interesting and maybe the envy of other conventions, because we have a mechanism of translating global targets, international biodiversity strategies and action plans that are then being reported, monitored, being reported on, and brought back to COP for review, and that's what will happen in Armenia, the global review. And Gibbon has been working to strengthen its own capacity to integrate itself into these government processes, because governments themselves have decided that the national strategies should be whole of society, but they haven't always had the capacity or the willingness or the time to really engage whole of society, and maybe youth are the last group that they think of. Other groups are more established in national decision making. So you have business associations, you have consumer organizations, you have farmers associations, etc. But youth organizations did not have that much of a tradition to be integrated. And Gibbon has been essentially doing its own capacity building, and that's a major achievement, to make sure that youth can participate in this national biodiversity strategies and action plans. And youth has been there in force at COP15 and COP16, which was the COP de la Gente. But yes, you said funding remains an issue. Now, this is a sad anecdote, but at COP16, there was an amazing youth event. Everybody was there. But believe me, the youth had to come and pay for their own toilet paper, and I'm not joking. The funding didn't even stretch to that. So there was such a major effort made by youth to raise funding. They traveled amazing roads, and it's also not easy to get to Armenia. We have to recognize that, but youth took it upon themselves. Some of them traveled 48 hours on the cheapest route to get there, and then they had to buy toilet paper. So I was very annoyed about that. But the crisis of funding is one that stretches to participation, very much in our convention as well. So it is an appeal we always make to all our parties. Inclusivity matters. The framework is for all and can only be implemented with all, so we need to have everybody at the table. And I want to maybe close all of this to say, you know, when you as young people make this effort that you are making, maybe you don't always feel that you're being heard because of the situation I described in the beginning. Time is running out, you can't speak anymore. But we have seen at COP15 and even more at COP16, youth was everywhere. You had your own hubs, you had your own events. We were very active in Education Day, you had trainings, you did actions. And in the end, we see things in the framework that I believe we would not have seen without youth there. So that the concept of intergenerational equity is anchored in the framework. The human rights-based approach is anchored in the framework. Those were priorities that youth brought to COP15. You were very vocal, you were very well organized, and honestly, I think without your intervention, we would not have achieved that. So, to me, cumbersome as it is, and you're doing a lot of sacrifices to come and participate, it is worth it. The last part, youth can also play a very important role in helping monitoring. You are active civil society participants. You can see what is going on around you. You're also AI savvy, which many people are not, speaking about certain generations here, so you can integrate that knowledge and bring that to governments and educate governments about all the possibilities that are there, and we very much rely on you to do that. I don't know if somebody from the Citizen Science Network is here. They've been very, they've been very vocal at this meeting. They need to recruit people to help them observe, to help them report, to help them become active stewards of nature. And I think they would be happy to be connecting with Gibbon and other networks. And my very, very last point, as you said, you remain in silos. Also, youth remains in silos. So anything we can do, we're going into a triple COP year for the Rio Conventions. Let us dream a little bit about an event where we can bring the youth networks of the 3 Rio Conventions together so that you can formulate one set of priorities which you bring to all 3 conventions to help those conventions move forward in their processes, be more coordinated, more integrated in planning, in identifying indicators, in monitoring and reporting. We need this push from the outside because it's difficult for organizations to reform from the inside. The secretariats are committed. The parties, I think they are committed, but we need all to be pushed. So we rely on you for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Astrid. Yes, it's also important to be reminded that youth are also in silos, yeah, because we hear that MEAs are at silos, UN systems at silos, governments, but we as youth and you as youth are also in silos, yeah. So we all need to work hard to be together, yeah, and that's what we all need. And just also on your example of Global Youth Biodiversity Network, Astrid, it's, if I'm not mistaken, it's one of the oldest youth constituencies in the system. So they have been there since 2010, which is also impressive, and they're still quite active. And we as UNEP are also very happy to have been working with them a lot this past year, including with national chapters in Kenya, South Africa, and with almost newborn chapter in Armenia, which we will also touch upon a bit later. So now moving to Yvonne, to also conclude this first round of reflections from MEA Secretariats. So as CITES celebrates its 50th anniversary this year, congratulations again. What youth-related milestones are you also celebrating as part of this bigger occasion? And what are you looking forward to for CITES youth engagement in the next 50 years? Or maybe less, or maybe more.
I think it's working now, yes. Thanks so much, and indeed, we are celebrating 50 years since the CITES came into force in 1975, and for those of you who may not be so familiar with CITES, what it does is to regulate international trade in wild species of animals and plants, those species that are on the appendices of CITES, which now number more than 41,000 species on these appendices, where 97% of the species can be traded as long as it's under a regulated framework with permitting system to be able to engage in this trade. And Appendix 1 species are those that cannot be commercially traded, and that's about 3% because they are so threatened with extinction. So this is what CITES does, and to ensure, and the ultimate goal is to ensure that the trade in wildlife is sustainable, legal, and traceable, so that future generations, and that's why youth is so important for CITES, so future generations can enjoy these wild species in nature and that they don't disappear. So we've been working on this for 50 years, and one of the resolution that I was speaking about youth came into being at COP17 in South Africa. That was back in 2016. And since then, one of the milestones that we have celebrated is the one that we just achieved at COP20, which just finished last week in Samarkand, Uzbekistan, where there has been amendment to that resolution to include now a CITES Global Youth Network. CGYN is now included, now recognized as the network of CITES, and so this is very exciting for all of us. This resolution is sort of a formal framework where we're working with participation and collaboration and of course awareness raising and all of this, and how the convention works formally with the youth. But now with the CITES Global Youth Network, it's going to be much more, where there's going to be much more involvement of the youth in the activities. Now, something that's very important, I should really be grateful to Singapore that they have been supporting this from the very beginning. They started out with the launch of a global network on CITES, a global youth network on CITES that was more regional, that had more, it was more for the Asia region involvement a few years back. Then they later had then they later launched this network with lots of participation from the youth in that region. But then later it had a summit, a global youth summit, where there was participation of about more than 100 youth from all over the world. Now it's become quite global, representing something like 76 countries. There's in the Global Youth Network, it has now more than 100 participants, youth participants from about 76 countries, representing all of the regions of CITES. So it's gaining strength, and we really have to be grateful for Singapore for all the support that they have been given. Now, even more, another milestone that we have reached at this COP20 was that we had a representation of 25 youth in the meeting itself as part of delegations of the parties, observers from academia and other groups that were represented and had a voice at the meeting. And I think this is the most exciting part. And I'm of two minds from the discussions that we have been hearing here. These are lawyers, these are scientists, these are working, many of them are already working within the CITES management authorities and CITES scientific authorities, and they're part of this youth group. And I'm of two minds of participation of youth, because on the one hand, if you're part of a delegation, you're coming to the meeting as part of a delegation, there's a strength in that, and we urge our parties to include youth in their delegations, and there's a strength in that because you participate then in the negotiations of all the, when we're talking about implementation of the convention, decisions related to that, when the proposals for adding CITES list, adding species to the CITES list, you're participating in that if you're part of the delegation. But then of course there's also the issue of advocacy, that youth, you want to be able to raise your voice, to be able to say something in the meeting about what youth wants for the various MEAs in which you're participating. So that can also be a way in which youth participates sort of as a separate group, a major group that is speaking on behalf of youth and to be able to raise their voices. But I also think, and I appreciate Astrid bringing up, and the other youth representatives here bringing up the fact that they sometimes get left out and their voices are not heard because we run out of time. So I think we have to think more carefully of when we want the youth to become involved, when we're at these these governing body meetings that we're having and decisions are being made. Often the decisions are made already. The discussions that are happening about how that decision is going to result is already happening amongst the parties before the floor is even given to the observers and to the youth to voice their concerns or to raise their voices. So maybe that's one thought that we must have. How can we involve them where it's more effective, so that before the decision is actually taken, before the gavel drops, that we can hear the voices and consider them and reflect on them before making those final agreements. I think also it would be very important to ensure that there is funding, and I hear you speaking loud and clear about that. There's been some discussions amongst the groups of youth that have been participating that they can't find the funding to be able to travel to the meetings, for example. So I think there has to be more discussions on that. These are difficult times, as Astrid had said, very difficult times, but again, I think that integrating into delegations can help us, but we will have to make more of an effort to ensure that you have the way of participating and voices can be heard, and you can actually prepare documents for the meetings to be able to have a voice before those decisions are taken. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yvonne, for sharing CITES experience, successful CITES experience also in engaging youth. Having youth in national delegations, I think it's a great idea, and everyone agrees with that. And because of COVID and all this online world situation we're living in, we also tend to think that, okay, everything can be done online now, but also seeing like more than 1,000 young people together at the Youth Environment Assembly like 2 weeks ago, and just the energy and the power that it brings, I think we will never replace it with any like Zoom or Teams call. So just also would like to support, if possible, the national delegations to include young people who can come, learn, talk to each other, and share how they help in their countries to tackle these issues that affect all of us, such as biodiversity loss and other challenges. Okay, so now we can finally move to hear from our distinguished guests. And Your Excellency, Minister, Armenia is preparing to host the UN Convention on Biological Diversity Conference of the Parties next year in 2026, which creates a critical opportunity to place Armenian youth and also global youth at the center of national biodiversity action. So my question to you is, why do you think it's important to meaningfully engage youth in national implementation of MEAs in your context, and what are effective ways of ensuring this in Armenia? Maybe you have some good examples to share with us tonight. Over to you.
Thank you very much. First and foremost, I'd like to thank my co-panelists for sharing their insight about the difficulties of making sure the youth is engaged in the decision-making processes, and Armenia will do its best to make sure that the COP17 will address all those issues, and that the youth will be represented not only for example, in the green zone, which is also very important. It's an opportunity, it's a platform for the networking, but also in the blue zone, in the decision-making processes. Just continuing commenting on what our colleague said, the organizing committee of the COP17 Armenia is we try to make it as inclusive as possible, because inclusivity is our political approach to the solutions and to the agenda of the COP17. We'd like to make sure that our COP17 that Armenia is hosting is as inclusive as possible. That is why the decision-making processes, even in the preparatory processes, even in the logistical issues, it's gone through the organizing committee, and the organizing committee has representatives from the youth officials, and they have their own saying in it. The growing environmental challenges, the biodiversity loss, the climate change, those are very important issues that require multi-actor solutions. And this is where the youth plays a very important role in the forefront in terms of the activism and in terms of the bringing new ideas. The engaging youth in environmental agreements is crucial, because they bring innovative ideas and drive accountability and ensure long-term sustainability. Every time I go to the universities or the schools, every time I have a meeting with the youth council that advises the ministry on the policy making, I always hear very basic questions where we always have the answers but never thought about those problems, never, because we do not consider that being a problem. This means that the youth, they see what we don't see. That is why the engagement is extremely, extremely important, to make sure that we cover all aspects of the problem. And I'm very glad to mention that the Armenia's delegation, the country delegation, especially in such important platforms like the UNEPs, like the COPs are, we have the youth representative, and today with our delegation we have two lovely ladies. They represent their NGO, their civil society, their friends, and also the university, and they also study the environmental studies. So this is very important, and continuing the engagement, I think that the education and the youth, they go hand in hand. So what the government should do is to make sure that the educational platforms, there is enough information and opportunities for the youth to learn about environment. For example, in Armenia, we have a misconception that studying in the environmental field will only lead to one way of business, or will lead to you to one position where you could work. But this is definitely not true. The world has been changed a lot, and we need more and more environmentalists. And probably this is very unfortunate because of the serious issues that we have. But what we have done, we've tried to work with the universities and bring new programs, new bachelor programs that target the environmental issues, the youth engagement. And recently, last year, we worked with the National Academy of Sciences of Armenia, and we established the master's program on biodiversity and conservation studies, where we concentrate not only on the science, which is extremely important, but for example, the CITES itself is one of the programs. Why? Because we want to know that those students, the generation will later on, will carry on with higher political positions, that they will be the decision makers, and they know how the system works. They know how the bureaucracy works. It's very weird that I'm talking about bureaucracy, being from the government, but I believe me, bureaucracy. There is no state without bureaucracy, but at the same time, we don't like bureaucracy ourselves either. But that is very important, that the youth knows how the system works. They are involved in local community decision-making processes already to the state level. Another issue that I see, we mostly concern the youth as a group, and we say the vulnerable groups, which is also very unfortunate, and which is true. The youth is one of our vulnerable groups, and they need much more attention. But besides that, and most importantly, the youth should be concerned as stakeholders, as participants of the decision-making processes, and the decisions that we make, we do not differ them by age, by sex, and by age, right? So it's the decisions for everybody. So they also should be involved in those processes, and they should also be considered as stakeholders. But since I mentioned about the vulnerable groups, how we do the transition, how we make sure that they are considered more of a stakeholders, is to call upon, for example, to the developed countries, to the developed world, and to others, is to make sure that we have enough donorship, enough sponsorship, to make sure that we have active participation of the youth in many events. Our colleague mentioned about we should monitor and see how many delegations usually include the youth. That's always a problem of finances, and always a problem of, again, the decisions and the mechanism. To have that mechanism is easy. We could just make a decision within the country saying that the youth should be part of this. For example, in Armenia, we are working with UNICEF and other organizations, and we have many councils that they have the right to advise to the ministers, to the governments, and they have the right to follow up, and they have the right to monitor, right? But it always comes to the finances and the participation. One sad example is the Panama, the substance meeting. We are struggling to get the decisions done. We are negotiating to get the decisions done. But there are so many delegations that the whole delegation was consist of only one participant, only one official. And that makes it physically, it is hard, it is impossible. So when we talk about inclusivity, let's make sure that we have enough funds so that also we sponsor the side events, the trips, and all those mechanisms, so that the youths can get to the UNEA, the youths can get to the Climate COP, Biodiversity COP, and other decision-making platforms. So I have many other examples that we do in Armenia, but I don't like to take your time. Maybe I'll recap it later. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for sharing with us unique perspectives from your country, from Armenia. So you mentioned about how education is important and how you work with universities and educational institutions. From UNEP's, I just wanted to add that, as we like to say it, we need to meet young people where they are. So of course we know many young people are in the universities, but in many countries, unfortunately, many young people are also out of the universities, right, and formal educational institutions. So that's also something to consider. Other means of reaching them. At UNEP, for example, we have initiatives like the video gaming industry, also sports, and maybe there are any more creative spaces how to reach them, which we can also discuss, of course, later. So now from Armenia, we're traveling to Sri Lanka, and Mr. Kamal Udovalala. So this year, Sri Lanka, as I hope many of you know, has tabled a draft UNESCO 7 resolution on enhancing the meaningful participation of youth in environmental processes and on environmental education. And this resolution really saw great support from so many other member states, which is very impressive and exciting. So could you please share with us an example of initiative or initiatives in your country which provide concrete opportunities for enhancing youth engagement in Sri Lanka in support of the effective implementation of biodiversity-related processes?
Okay, thank you very much for the invitation. As you mentioned, we recognize the youth engagement in environmental activities. That is why we put forward the resolution, and now it is clear, as you said. So from Sri Lankan's experience, intergenerational collaboration in biodiversity protection, we usually use youth's engagement in this biodiversity subject, and protection is most effective when youths are recognized as equal partners in policy processes rather than peripheral actors. What works for us is combining the long-standing ecological knowledge of older generations with the innovation, digital skills, and energy of younger people. This partnership strengthens both policy advocacy and on-the-ground implementation. So we use the youth's engagement in ground implementation because they use the new technologies and they are very updated generations with education and other skills. So Sri Lanka has several active initiatives that youth can explore. These include our National Youth Biodiversity Engagement and Capacity Building Program. So we have this, in this biodiversity sector, a capacity building program for youth. So we use youth training programs in these national biodiversity capacity building programs and university conservation societies. There are so many societies and volunteers involved in university activities, so we use those university societies for these conservation activities, and also environmental pioneer brigades. So that is for school activities, school pupils. There we use the presidential award scheme. That means if they pioneered in the environmental activities, we award them as pioneers in the hands of the President of Sri Lanka. So we recognize that in that level. So we use those pioneer brigades in our environmental activities as well. And grassroots marine and coastal conservation networks. And also, though these platforms, youth contribution directly to wetland monitoring, mangrove and coral restoration, seagrass mapping, invasive species monitoring, and local biodiversity planning. So there are strong prospects for youth to participate further, especially in monitoring KMGBF targets, supporting restoration activities, and contributing to NBSAP consultations and national reporting. We continue to provide training in biodiversity monitoring, GIS, drone mapping, sustainable agriculture, and green entrepreneurship. These efforts help equip young people in these tools they need to play meaningful roles in MEA implementation. So Sri Lanka remains committed to supporting youth engagement through technical training, institutional access and collaborative partnerships, ensuring that our biodiversity governance remains inclusive, intergenerational, and future-focused. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kamal. You mentioned about the green entrepreneurship, which is very important, because what we found out during some of our recent research that we supported, that young people in almost every country, I think, really care about how to sustain themselves now and in future, right, and the livelihoods. So it's very important to also make young people understand that nature is also what can give them jobs, food on the table, right, and everything else. So green skills and green entrepreneurship are very, very important. Audience, are you still with us? Yes, thank you. I see the numbers, I see sometimes when I turn my head, the numbers are not the same as they were 10 minutes ago, but that's fine. Let me just check here how many young people we have in the room. So raise your hand if you feel young tonight. Great. Also feel free just to stretch yourself if you can, or if you need, as at least us here, we're quite quite squeezed. Okay, but we're almost there. So now I'm going back to Kevin. So Kevin, after hearing all these exciting examples from Armenia, from Sri Lanka, from CBD, from CITES, I hope you feel inspired and happy. But still, my question is, what in your view, what more could be done? Because all our speakers shared brilliant examples of how youth is being engaged. They shared about the challenges and aspirations. And it seems like so much is going on already, and so much is being done, but it also feels like it's never enough. So I want to hear from you, what more could be done to enhance meaningful participation of youth in MEAs and national regional engagements, both from policy and practice perspective.
Thank you so much. First of all, I would like to just request the audience to give a round of applause to Sri Lanka for sponsoring the draft resolution on meaningful engagement of young people, because that's really great and it's an inspiration. And I hope that many other governments and MEA setups borrow this so that we have such discussion across the multilateral environmental agreements. So the agenda setting of youth, having young people in the text beforehand, as Sri Lanka has shown us that is possible, is very important. And we hope that next year, being the year of the COPs, that we can have this embedded in all the Rio conventions in terms of having young people really reflected in the language of the conventions. And two, we need to also move fast to start investing in young people's innovation. Here in Kenya, for example, there are several youth-led conservation programs that are run by different youth entities. The Kenyan Youth Biodiversity Network, for example, is running a mangrove restoration project down at the south coast for several years now, and I think it's prime for investment to create green jobs, as it has been mentioned before. Things like beekeeping in the mangrove ecosystems, ecotourism could be explored. They're also running a program on marine plastics and all this. Three, we also need to work closely with young people to explore their capacity need, and I also celebrate the government of Rwanda, because in September they welcomed the 3rd African Youth Summit on Biodiversity, which is hosted by GBF Africa on biannual basis, which brings together young people from across the continent to discuss, the status of conservation, the issues and priorities of African youth in biodiversity, and how they can support the implementation of the global biodiversity framework. And so it's really important that governments and other partners continue to partner and shape such initiatives that not only build the capacity of these young people, but also put them as equal partners in the vision. And lastly, we have already spoken about the issue of literacy, and Madam Astrid mentioned about the CBD in a nutshell, which is a book that I really like, because it summarizes the convention and how young people can be integral part of it. And I'm happy to learn that it's going to be another edition next year. What we need to do to move this forward is now to move to translating this book into national and regional languages. It will be great, for example, here in Africa to have that book in Swahili, so that young people who are from local setups can learn and learn about the convention and see their role and how they can be effectively engaged. And so it's there is a ton of possibilities of working with young people. We just need the goodwill, we need the structures, and of course we need the resources to enable us to do that.
Thank you very much, Kevin. Translating such documents into local languages is very, very important, because we also need to remember that the English language is not the first language for so many young people. And even this event is being in English, and it's been transmitted on YouTube, so maybe very many young people couldn't understand that. But it's also in our hands to make sure we make our documents, materials, resources available to everyone. Astrid, after hearing from representative from Kenya Youth Biodiversity Network, we would like to go back to you and building on what Kevin has just said, to ask what role can youth play in your view in improving compliance and implementation under CBD processes?
Yeah, thank you so much. So first of all, I really want to compliment Kevin. That was the perfect presentation. So there's nothing I could disagree with. And I really hope that everything you've set out as an aspiration becomes true. I would say three things. So first of all, youth can be integrated and can itself do monitoring activities for the KMGBF. I think that would be very, very important. We're moving to our global review based on country reports. But country reports are one thing. We need the observations, and I want to quote the minister, and I've written that down for a tweet maybe. Youth sees things that others don't see. So we need that knowledge, and if you can bring that to the review process, that would be very important. The second thing I see as something where I believe youth will be better than many others, and which is a growing concern for me, is environmental misinformation. So the amount of false stories that is circulating on social media that downplay climate change, the impacts of climate change, that deny the fact that biodiversity loss has anything to do with well-being or with economies, etc., is staggering. And I believe it's young people that are much better dealing with social media, that speak the language of social media, that would have a role, could have a role in countering these trends, and I would find that very important. And the third, of course, is to become engaged in education. So we hope to adopt an education action plan, or we have adopted an education decision. We're now working on an action plan to be adopted at COP17, integrating biodiversity, but more broadly, the understanding of interconnectedness of environment and economy into curricula is super important. And if youth doesn't push for it, I think it will not happen. So that will be another thing that I think youth can do to ensure that people understand better what the environment is about and why it matters. And we need to start basically at a young age. And we can also hope that the youngest people will educate their parents, as is already happening now. I think many parents say they learn more about the environment from their kids than they learn from newspapers or any other information source.
Astrid, your last point just goes back to age-based categorization of capacity, also presented by Kevin earlier. Okay, now we're moving to our last question, which will be shared by His Excellency Minister Hambardzo Mathivasan, Mr. Kamal Uduwawala, and also Peter Bulimo. So, Your Excellency, I will start with you, if you allow. So my question is about intergenerational collaboration. You're perhaps one of the youngest ministers ever in the world, perhaps. I'm not sure, but at least it's just two of you in the UNEP delegations. We checked this before. So it will be great to hear from you on what makes intergenerational collaboration effective in driving policy advocacy in biodiversity protection, of course, in your context.
Thank you Thank you very much. Since you asked, fun fact, I'm not the youngest minister in the world, and not in Armenia, but I was the youngest acting deputy prime minister in the world at the time, and also for governor. And I had my own challenges working with my colleagues. I had my own challenges. So about the intergenerational connection and intergenerational solutions that we could find so that the youth is much more involved. I think when it comes to the government is to make sure that we have right platforms and ambitious platforms for the youth to be more involved. One of the examples that I could bring is we have several MOUs with youth organizations that they actually came to the ministry and they actually came to the government with their ideas, and we just gave them that platform and an opportunity to work, and that was not much from our behalf. It was not much, but the return that we get from the youth, it was much more that we could think of. So some of those projects are, I don't want to be mistaken with the titles. So some of those projects were AI for biodiversity and AI solutions for nature program that currently we have in Armenia. It's a startup company, and we are working again with the youth and the startup. And they also they are civil society, and they are civil society, so they do not only represent AI, but they also represent their group of interest. And the other one was the 7th Startup Summit when we first started working, with the NGO, the youth NGO. They were very small. Nowadays, the 7th Startup Summit, it's a regional event, and it happens in the forest, in the national park, right next to the Lake Sevan, and it brings many professionals, young professionals from all around the world who are not necessarily interested in environmental issues. But since the whole point of the startup is to bring those professionals, they are actually helping us, like Astrid said, they are actually helping us by raising the awareness. They are doing the campaign for us. They are saying, this is the forest, we should take care of forest. Whatever you are doing in your business, you could contribute to the environment, and so on, so on. And we have one idea. We are trying to work with our colleagues, and we will do our best to try to organize a pre-COP youth event next year, probably. Of course, we are already out of the 2025, but I think next year, sometime in summer, we'll be able to organize an event, and we'd like to do it with the 7th Startup Summit. So it will be merging that platform with the COP as well. So yes, I think with those platforms, with ideas, and sometimes this is what happens in the government. We sit and we try to come up with solutions for other groups, for other representatives, and without them. We try to do it for them without hearing them first. But I think the right way to do it is to hear them first. Probably they already have the solutions. They already have thought about it. So is to make sure that the governments have the right platforms for the youth to be involved. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Mr. Kamal, the same question for you. In terms of intergenerational collaboration, what makes it effective in driving policy advocacy in biodiversity protection in your context in Sri Lanka?
Yes. As I said earlier, we have to have the implementation plan, and we have the implementation plan for this resolution. So then after that, we have to engage youth in this implementation plan for these biodiversity activities as well. And also we have to design the awareness program of these environmental agreements for these youths, because they are outside of the government and they are not involved in the policy making or in these policies. And also we have a plan to engage the more university students, and also the volunteers. There are so many volunteers working with us in a lot of subjects. So one, we have to do institutionalize youth as formal partners in MEA process, multi-national environmental agreement processes. We have to get them into, and also the link youth activities to national MEA targets. So link youth activities means they are engaging not with the environmental ministry as such. So we have to get them on board, and also assign youth clear role on spatial planning, restoration activities, protected areas especially, and also the pollution reduction. So not only the biodiversity, we have the pollution in waste management as well. And also support multi-task holder partnerships. And by those engagements, we have planned to get those youths into these capacity building programs and national biodiversity engagement. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kamal. Peter, your final words? You heard this question twice already, so I'm not sure if I need to repeat.
Crystal clear. Yeah, so I'll be very quick. I think there are a couple of things that you'd want to think about, but for me, the most important one is intentionality. We really want to applaud ourselves for coming so far in terms of bringing young people to the table, but there is one thing to be on the table, but sorry, it is also like being able to inform the menu. So yes, we are creating these youth groups, and we are creating the networks, and like the CYMG and the GBN and in all these other MEAs. But then where are the young people in terms of organizational budgeting? Where are the young people in terms of strategy? Because, for example, in previous engagements, we have provided very strategic recommendations on how we can meaningfully participate in the process. For example, in the Pact of the Future, in the agenda of youth and future generations, you'll see we asked that modalities be established for tracking what do you actually mean by meaningful youth engagement or participation. As Kevin had mentioned, we are also requesting for mechanisms to track, for example, the number of youth delegates that are coming into these conventions. Again, just the other day, we asked the secretary, the presidency of UNEP 7 to also help us beyond the delegation. Every time we have a convention, they are the youth declaration, and we come up with proposals. What percentage of these proposals actually end up in the final negotiation text? Because once you're able to achieve this, then we are able to work together. We are able to incorporate like tradition, old wisdom, and young innovation to be able to move things forward. And with that, we are able to also be able to co-produce knowledge and co-produce in terms of what the diverse knowledge systems are, bringing in both vertically and horizontally. And vertically, I mean like the wisdom of the people that are very much experienced in the field, but also young people. And again, horizontally, I'm meaning the different groups that exist within this space. And I feel like once we have the strategies already put in place, we are able to easily move these things forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Okay, I think I still see less people as 5 minutes ago. So please remain seated. Thank you very much for all your contributions and ideas. And please allow me to invite Deputy Executive Director of UNEP, Elizabeth Mrema, for the closing remarks to wrap this beautiful evening up for us.
Good evening, all. Thank you very much, all the panelists. You have said it all. I don't know what the moderator wants me to add, but since I've been asked, or probably positively forced to speak, let me do so, but I know I will repeat quite a number of the sentiments which we have already had. So, distinguished youth, Let me begin and recognize them first, then excellencies, colleagues, and all participants here. We have been hearing, youth have been at the heart of our intense discussions and negotiations in the last few days. And I'm so glad that this UNEA 7 came hot on the heels of the Youth Environment Assembly, which I also had the privilege to officiate. So clearly the spirit and the urgency that hundreds of youth participants from all over the world brought to Nairobi has helped to inspire and motivate our actions. That assembly, the Youth Assembly, prompted a lot of debate, not just in the conference rooms, but also online. And I was particularly struck by one simple comment which I read on the social media, which says, youth are not the future. We are the now. Because many times we keep saying future generation, future generation. We are forgetting actually it is now leading to the future. So that was not just a simple statement. I think it was actually a call for action, because it reminds us that decisions we make today must reflect the needs, the ambitions, and the creativity of the young people who are already actively shaping the world around them. And the multilateral environmental agreements are critical partners in this journey. And I really like to acknowledge the leadership of the CITES and in organizing this event, together with colleagues in the CBD Secretariat, and other MEAs here, whose presence have strengthened the collective voice of multilateral environmental agreements. So working collaboratively with MEAs, these include CITES, CBD, CMS, Ramsar, also our scientific panels like the IPBS, and with the presence of our CBD COP next year, clearly are essential in securing a planet upon which all people, especially the young people, can strive. So the UN system is evolving to provide more meaningful opportunities for youth engagement. You may all be aware, the youth, that even the Secretary General has recently established a UN Youth Office. And youth recognized very well in the Pact for the Future, which was agreed last year. And that again demonstrates that youth are central to everything that we do. Here in UNEP, we are doing our part by teaming up with schools in furthering education, sports team, video game industry, and the youth movements to engage the youth people in environmental action. The MEAs are equally already showing what is possible. And I really applaud the adoption. If I remember the Ramsar Wetland COP15 in July this year, a youth resolution was adopted, a resolution which strengthened commitment to youth engagement under the Wetland Convention, building on the foundations which had been already laid at their last COP. But here we have heard what the youth are in CITES, in CBD. And let us also be honest, I'm sure all of us, we can do more. The well-being of today's youth and the generations to come depend on breaking the trends of environmental decline. As that social media which I've quoted above reminds us that the youth are the now. So we must empower these young people to deliver for the people and the planet. And that's why us here in UNEP are reaching out to the youth to also help guide our next medium-term strategy, which I've just been told, finally agreed. I would like to highlight actually 3 pillars that have emerged from our consultations with the youth. And the youth either the youth or us, UNEP, we call it 3 C's. 1C, commitment, meaning stronger political will, which is essential to support youth engagement. And I really I'm encouraged by the discussion of the Children and Youth Resolution led by the government of Sri Lanka, and many thanks that it has gone through. That now continue to show the power of the youth. And the youth are asking also for national youth focal point systems, to ensure meaningful inclusion in national implementation and policy consultation, and participation in the negotiations and decision-making, with their contribution treated as equal partners as part of the valuable work. And I heard, I think it was the last person there, where he's saying now it's high time to know exactly the government delegations, how many youth are included in those delegations. And then to even go further, how their proposals, comments, contributions in the negotiation processes finally get accepted. If I may use Astrid here with CBD, unless it has changed, within CBD processes, the youth are involved. The youth are also speaking. They can make proposals and comments, and basically need only one party or member state to second that proposal. Not 2/3, not 10, just one. And I think that's quite an innovative approach, which is already exercised within the CBD governing process. The second C is collaboration. And this is where working closely with youth networks comes in. For instance, the Children and Youth Major Group, again, CBD, they have what they call Global Youth Biodiversity Network, which as of 3 years ago, I knew they had already national chapters of over 65. I believe probably by now, 3 years later, must have increased. So these networks is where then we see those diverse youth group voices coming up in basically creating a genuinely youth-friendly environment. So this is the collaboration which also need to be further strengthened within the MEAs processes, and will be paramount to drive the effective and coordinated implementation of those conventions, but also our resolutions, which will come out of here today, now empowered with the specific youth resolution, which then will ensure also governments truly embrace inclusive, whole of government, whole of society approaches. The third C, and I regret to say, it is called hard cash. And cash is the word, because resources are critical, and the youth need also to be supported. And when I say resources, it's not necessarily money. It could be how best do we use their innovation, their innovative strategic, in how best also all of us can invest on the young people, so that then also the funding matches their ambition. So the young leaders, the message to me is very clear. Youth leadership and intergenerational collaboration are no longer optional. They are essential to turning ambition into action and ensuring that our global biodiversity commitments are met. So let us all move together with commitment, collaboration, and cash resources to empower the young people as agents of change. And let us ensure that the young voices are not just heard, but heeded to, so that their energy drives concrete action at all levels. Because our planet and the well-being of all generations literally depends on the youth. And let us work across borders, across divisions, across generations to secure that thriving world. And I'm reminded, and I would like to quote you, Your Excellence, Minister from Armenia, our CBD COP, who just said, and I hope I'll quote it correctly, if my handwriting was as fast as you spoke. The youth see what we don't see, which is why we need their eyes to be here. And these are the eyes during this UNEA 7. Thank you.
Is it working? Thank you very much. Please don't leave us. We want to have a group photo. Please join us here, Susan, and actually everyone, just come here. This is the last event of the day today. So let's all come together and have a very quick picture. And if we can have some music, that would be great too. Thank you.